Good evening. Welcome to the forum. My name is Chris Stone. I'm professor of criminal justice here at the Kennedy School of Government, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here to our discussion tonight of policing democracies in times of terror. We have a broad subject, and we have a really first-rate group of panelists, and I want to explain how the evening will proceed over the next hour and a quarter. We're going to spend the first 45 minutes in a discussion here on the stage, focusing really on the question of accountability for policing operations, particularly anti-terrorism policing operations. The subject of policing democracies is very broad, but one way to understand the challenge of policing democracies is policing that is accountable. That's accountable to the public, is accountable to the government, that's accountable in the society. But how that accountability is structured, how it works, varies from place to place, from city to city, from democracy to democracy. And we'll be talking about some of the varieties of accountability in democratic societies here tonight. After about 45 minutes, I will invite questions from all of you, and I hope you won't be shy. There are microphones. There are 4 microphones, one on each side here and one on each of the raised platforms. And we'll just go around. You can just stand by a microphone and we'll take questions as they come. So our guests, our panelists tonight, Commissioner Raymond Kelly of the New York Police Department is the first person ever to hold that position twice. Some years ago, I had a chance to work with Commissioner Kelly in his first tour of duty there. And it's a great pleasure to have you here now that I've had to come north a little bit. Commissioner Kelly is, in addition to his years of service with the New York Police Department, in between 1994 and his return as commissioner in 2001, 2002, served in Washington as the Undersecretary for Enforcement at the United States Department of the Treasury, overseeing the whole array of enforcement operations, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Customs Service, and others. And then in another extraordinary move in an extraordinary career, asked to take over the operational control of one of those divisions and ran the United States Customs Service, where his leadership distinguished him in many ways and became particularly on issues of accountability, issues of ethnic profiling and other service in the Customs Service really distinguished himself there. He's also served in Haiti, running the police operations there. Again, a distinguished career and great accomplishments. Very happy to have you here. Nick Hardwick is the chair of Britain's Independent Police Complaints Commission. He is the first chair of that commission, appointed in December of 2002 to a new entity that took over from I think probably safe to say, widely a less satisfactory arrangement for police oversight in the United Kingdom. The Independent Police Complaints Commission is today probably the best resourced, most powerful, and I would say most professionally organized oversight body, external oversight body over police operations, probably in the world. Nick comes to that job from a 3-part career working with young offenders at an organization called NACRO, the National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders, then as director of Centrepoint, working with homeless youth throughout England and Wales, and finally as the chief executive of the Refugee Council, the largest organization in England and Wales dealing with refugees. It is the office, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, which we'll hear a bit more about, is responsible, among other things, for the investigation of all shootings or serious injuries by police throughout England and Wales, and we'll be focusing particularly tonight on the case of Charles de Menezes, a Brazilian who was shot and killed by the Metropolitan Police in the Stockwell Underground Station on July 22nd earlier this year. Kathleen O'Toole is not only a distinguished longtime member of the Boston Police, who then left the Boston Police Department in the 1980s and took up both created her own organization and then later served as Director of Public Safety for the state of Massachusetts. And particularly before coming back to serve as police commissioner in Boston, did something makes her unique in American policing. She served as the sole, I think, American law enforcement representative on the Patent Commission examining the policing arrangements in Northern Ireland. And it's particularly on that experience, as well as her experience as a police executive, that we'll be drawing on tonight as we focus on issues of police oversight in times of terrorism. So let me start with Commissioner Kelly. In some sense, this doesn't have to be a choice of one form of accountability or the other. But there's a broad debate, I think, as police operations focus more on terrorism, on anti-terrorism these days, about whether the accountability for that structure is best done inside a police department or externally. You lead and have conceived probably the most extensive anti-terrorism operation of certainly any municipal police force in the United States, perhaps of any police force in the United States. And so far, since creating that unit, we were talking before, but as far as I can tell, I think as far as the press has reported, really no problems of the kind we see in Stockwell or recently in the Miami airport. And so I want to ask you about, yes, right, always hoping. But those things aren't, there's always a bit of luck in this, but it's never just luck. And I was wondering if you could share with us your own sense of how you build accountability to that and your thoughts about the debate between internal and external accountability.
Yeah, well, one thing you didn't mention about me is that I'm a graduate of the Kennedy School. And I tell you, it's really great to be back because it was absolutely a terrific experience for me. And I know that all of you who are Kennedy School students are enjoying it immensely. Let me just go through a couple of things about what's going on in the department. First, let me start off a little bit about the internal and external debate. The expanded mission of the police department, and as a result of the horrendous events of 9/11, have given us really unique and unprecedented challenges. We, of course, have to continue to combat conventional crime. I think we're doing a good job of that. It's down about 25% since September 11th, but as Commissioner O'Toole knows, that's never enough. There's always people looking for more and more, but we've had success in that regard. And we are now engaged in gathering intelligence and deploying resources to protect the city from potential terrorist attack. At the same time, we have to respect the privacy and constitutional rights of our citizens. And this is all a delicate balance, but it's one that we are committed to striking. New York, as New Yorkers say, is the capital of the world in many ways, but it is the financial capital of the world, the communications capital of the world, and we have been targeted twice, 8 times, I should say, prior to 9/11 and before. And there's every reason for us to believe that we're still in the crosshairs of the terrorists. As a result of that, we have engaged in sweeping reform, a sweeping reorganization of the department to help us prepare for these two missions. And at the same time, I believe that we've put in place internal controls that will ensure the integrity of these reforms. We have a very vibrant, proactive Internal Affairs Bureau. We have put in place new safeguards to protect the civil liberties of our citizens. Now, based on my experience, I believe that a robust, effective internal investigative function is the best way to monitor and to control against the police misconduct and corruption. It's got to be thoroughly embraced by the CEO, the chief, the commissioner, and it has to be properly resourced. If it isn't resourced, and if it is not embraced, it is, generally speaking, in many departments, the most unpopular assignment. If the support doesn't come from the top, that is a recipe for big problems. When I was commissioner last time in 1993, we overhauled the Internal Affairs Bureau. Quite frankly, we found that they were avoiding complex cases, and they weren't managing the cases that they had properly. So we did a series of things. I brought in a former U.S. attorney to head the Internal Affairs Bureau in the department. It reported directly, that position reported directly to the commissioner. We asked McKinsey & Company to come in and take a fresh look at our processes, and they made some very important and relevant recommendations. So we made it a much stronger organization. Now, I know from all reports that NIC's Independent Complaints Commission is effective and is, I'm told, working well. But one of the hurdles that you have when you have an external investigative entity is the difficulty in penetrating the culture, penetrating the kind of practices and mores of a particular department. I would say that in order for this to work well, independent investigating entity, that is, you have to have very strong subpoena power, and you have to be able to put at risk people's careers if they choose not to cooperate. Now, most independent investigative entities are not able to do that. In the city of New York, we have a Civilian Complaint Review Board. It is independent from the police department. It is a city agency, and I would submit that it is by far the most effective civilian complaint entity anywhere in the country. But even their investigations have lots of problems, lots of issues, because they're not able to get fully into the organization. Now, I certainly believe that there is a role for independent outside investigations. In the city of New York, we have 5 district attorneys because we have 5 counties in the city. We have the Civilian Complaint Review Board, as I mentioned. We have a committee to combat police corruption. And, of course, we have the grand jury system. So there are times when, certainly if an agency is dysfunctional, if it can't do it on its own, the time that an external investigation should be welcomed and certainly supported by the leadership of the organization. But I would say that for me, at least from my vantage point, having a strong, effective internal investigative function is the best way to reduce or prevent corruption in the first place. You have to have good leadership, and it has to be supported by the top. We have in the New York City Police Department over 800 officers that are involved in internal investigations and internal monitoring, I'll call it. We actually have our separate division just for quality assurance, quality control. You had mentioned some of the things that we've done to change the department, to help us better protect the city from a terrorism attack. Let me go through some of those. We have created a counterterrorism bureau and reformed our intelligence division. Brought in 2 top-flight professionals to help us do that. David Cohn, 35-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, is the head of our intelligence division. Right now, Michael Sheehan, who's been here on several occasions, is the head of our counterterrorism operations. Mike is a former Special Forces officer, former ambassador for counterterrorism at the State Department, former head of peacekeeping operations at the United Nations, member of Bush 1 and Clinton NSC staff. Before that, we started with Marine Lieutenant General Frank Labouty, who also did an outstanding job. We have assigned police officers overseas to 8 countries. They are in Israel and France, we're in Lyon, where Interpol is located, in London, Toronto, Montreal, Singapore, Dominican Republic, Amman, Jordan, and shortly we'll have an officer in Spain. What are they there for? They're there to ask the New York question. Is there any bit of information that they can glean that will help us better protect New York? And it proved helpful to us the London bombings that took place. We can talk more about that later. We have increased the number of officers that we have with the Joint Terrorist Task Force, the FBI. On September 11th, 2001, we had 17 investigators in our JTTF component. We now have 120, and we work more closely than ever with our federal partners. We devote 1,000 police officers a day, either directly or full-time equivalents, to our counterterrorism initiatives. We've identified 670 police officers with special language skills. We've tested them, we've taken them to Berlitz, and they rate them at language such as, in 40 sensitive languages, we call it, Urdu, Pashto, Hindi, Farsi, and some Chinese dialects. They've proven helpful to us in doing investigations, monitoring chats on the internet, that sort of thing, and certain websites that are concerned to us. We have put in place a cadre of research analysts that I would submit are second to none. So bright young people, some from the Kennedy School, from the Fletcher School, from Columbia Graduate International School of Studies, from some of the military academies, and they are doing outstanding work. They synthesize information from our own investigations and intelligence that's gathered from throughout the world, and they really are putting together a first-rate product, and that product has been shared and I think appreciated by the federal government. We have resources at all of our bridge and tunnels on a 24-hour basis. Those of you who've been to New York lately may see something that might seem surprising, where we have police officers, maybe as many as 100 radio cars, police cars, come together, and they'll assemble at one central location, mostly in Midtown, and then they'll go to other locations. It's determined by our intelligence division as to where they should go, and this is done as an element of surprise. If there's reconnaissance going on, somebody who wants to do us harm, we're sending our cars to sensitive locations, and officers get out and patrol at those locations, but on an unannounced basis. We do something roughly similar in our subway system, our transit system. We have over 600 miles of subway track. We have 468 stations in New York, and obviously it'll be a very lucrative target for terrorists. We have surges, we call them, in the transit system, where lots of officers will go on an unannounced basis. We train on a maintenance sweeps where an officer will get on every car of a train as it pulls into the station. We use our canine officers to help in that regard. And again, this is all to give an element of surprise or unpredictability to what we do. We have the Hercules Teams. Hercules Teams are groups of heavily armed officers that move, again, from sensitive location to sensitive location. This has been well received by the people in New York. It was something I was a little concerned about when we first did it, but the feedback has been very, very positive. Obviously, we have to do some investigations. The reality is of our world is that we have to do some terrorist-related investigations, and we need the appropriate authority to do that. In 2003, we challenged something called the Hanchu Agreement. It was an agreement that was signed in 1985 based on litigation that was started in 1971 that greatly limited our ability to do investigations of, we'll call them political groups. It eliminated our ability to even share information as far as these investigations are concerned. As I say, it started in 71 when during a totally different era. Vietnam was still going at the time. It's when our chief concerns were in these remote Cold War theaters far from home. So 30 years later, we wanted to change the restrictions of Hanchu so that we could do investigations that may, in fact, be of some terrorist activity taking place right in our own backyard. We were the only police department to have these restriction placed upon us. So we went to court. The Judge Haidt, agreed with us. He had been involved in Hanchu litigation literally for 30 years, the same judge. So we were able to change the Hanchu restrictions. And it was a common sense, I think, decision on the part of the judge. It requires some connection to potential unlawful activity. It limits the investigations to our intelligence division, or the chief executive of our intelligence division, David Cohen, who I mentioned before. He oversees those investigations. He's the one that authorizes it. We put in place an attorney who works only on Hanchu issues. That's his only job, to monitor, to make certain that we are in accord with that agreement. We have just announced, it happened to be in a paper today, but we've been doing it now for a couple of months. We have a panel of attorneys outside of the department, highly respected attorneys. 3 are former U.S. attorneys, and we use them as a sounding board. We don't give them specific information, but these are some policy things that we want to run by you, and I meet with them, and our Deputy Commissioner of Legal Matters meets with them, and they've been helpful, and we expect to work very closely with them in the future. With all of these changes, I think the thing that most surprises me is how little life has changed for the average New Yorker. Tourism is high as it's ever been. Last year we had 41 million visitors, the highest we've ever had. I would submit, and I think most New Yorkers would say, that our quality of life is better than ever. We have hundreds of major events, high-profile events in our city every year, and many more wanting to come. And one of those high-profile events was the Republican National Convention in 2004. The New York Times called it the largest protest at a political convention in the history of this country. It was a challenge for us. Of course, you had the incumbent party during a time of war that certainly was not popular with large segments of the public. Groups wanted to come to New York. You had a convention here in Boston, but it was clear that the difference was that the Republicans were in power, and a lot of people wanted their voice heard. So I'm very proud of that event, because we were able to handle that convention and historic numbers of protesters, and still have the city function, and I believe function well. We received a lot of praise. The police officers did a great job, and had a lot of public support, I think, emanating from that, and continuing to be there for us. That brings to mind the subway bag searches regimen that we've put in place. After the second round, attempted round of bombings in London on July 21st of last year, we decided, that is, the mayor decided, and we had recommended that we put in a system of searching for bags in our subway system, a very extensive system. And I think it's worked out very well. It's a valuable tool for us. It was challenged in court by the New York Civil Liberties Union. We had modeled our system on cases and practices that had passed muster in the past, the DWI checkpoints, the security checks that go on at the airports, that sort of thing. And we prevailed in court. The court found that it was a reasonable exercise of Fourth Amendment powers. So what we have is, I think, a regimen in place now that has continued to reduce crime in the subway, and given the public in New York a certain comfort level that government is taking care of business, we made certain that the intrusiveness of these searches was minimal, 30 to 45 seconds. We're using some technology to do it. We have a machine called the Sabre 4000. The public opinion polls after this put in place, that 85% support on the part of the public, which is an unheard of a number. Now, New Yorkers don't like to be convenienced very much, as I'm sure you know, but when it comes to the possibility of deterring a terrorist attack, they certainly went along with it. So I think the key to what we're doing is having this public acceptance. The constitutional safeguards don't change, but the threats do change. And we have to be flexible as an institution to address those changes. But we are doing it with a clear eye and a very conscious awareness of the constitutional restrictions that are out there. So let me stop there.
Okay, thank you. Nick Hardwick, Commissioner Kelly was talking about the internal accountability being, in his view, the best system. You run probably the largest external accountability, and was tested in last summer when the Metropolitan Police took the view that maybe it was not the best system at that moment in time to investigate the shooting on the Stockwell tube station. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and your view about whether external accountability can function, not just in ordinary circumstances, but in these anti-terrorist operations?
Okay, and first of all, like Commissioner Kelly, it's an honor to be here in Harvard. I'm not going to be able to claim to have been a student here, but when I get back home, I can drop into conversation my time at Harvard, and I don't need to say for how long. I can do that. So it's good to be here. And let me say, if I make my remarks about the system in the UK, I'm certainly not claiming that it's a model that you can apply anywhere. It's very much a product of the policing culture and the legal systems in the UK. And so I don't start from a proposition that it's replicable everywhere else. But maybe there are some things that can be learned elsewhere, good and bad. And Chris asked me to begin by talking about the events in London last July. So I'll cut to the chase and do that. And on the 6th of July, the 6th of July was a special day if you lived in London, because we'd been chosen to be the Olympic City 2012. And the truth is, we never really expected that. We didn't really think we were going to do that. And so it was a great day. It was fantastic. And even if you weren't sports mad, it was fantastic. And so people went to work the next day excited, ready to talk about it. And then on the 7th of July, 8:50 in the morning, 4 bombs go off, one a bit later, 4 bombs go off on the London transport system. 3 on the subway, 1 on a bus. 52 people killed, 700 injured. And it was I'm sure in Europe, especially, it felt very personal. It felt very personal. I travel to work on the subway system every day. My family are here. Travel on the London transport system every day. We go through those stations. When you get to work, everyone tells a story about how I almost could have been on that train. It could almost have been me. It could almost have been my family. So my starting point is believe you me, we are not going to do anything with our police accountability system that damages the ability of the police to respond effectively to that kind of event. This is real. It's about our safety, our family's safety. Then, 2 weeks later, on the 21st of July, there is an attempt to set off another 4 bombs. Right? Again, all on the subway network. The attempt fails, but the 4 bombers get away. Right? So they're out there, at large. And there is the most desperate manhunt going on to find them. And then, on the 22nd of July, a Brazilian man called John Charles de Menezes is wrongly identified as one of the bombers, and he is shot and killed by the Metropolitan Police on the subway network at Stockwell Station. And we investigate independently all police shootings. And to cut a long story short, what happens is the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, it's on the public record now, rings me up and says, look, this is a different situation now. We have a massive manhunt going on. This is a live operation. those rules don't apply, I'm not going to let you in. Now, there is some discussion, and it becomes clear that's not going to be a sensible position that's not going to be maintained, that position, and so a couple of days later, our investigation begins. And the question, I think, that's worth arguing about here is he right? Was that the right? Maybe he was right. Maybe in those circumstances, the normal kind of rules, the normal way of operating couldn't and shouldn't apply. So let me describe let me go back now and describe the context in which that took place. First of all, let me say a little bit about the kind of British policing context, where you have, there is still a sense of the kind of Robert Peel dictum of the people, the police are the people are the police. And even if it's a bit of a mythology, people like the idea of the British Bobby on their bicycle going around the villages doing that kind of thing. There is still that sense of it. Right? And you have 43 different forces each with its own discrete geographical area they're responsible for, ranging from the Metropolitan Police, the London Police with about 31,000 officers, to some of the smaller county forces with 1,000 officers. And they are unarmed. A police shooting is only volunteers will be armed, and a police shooting is still a relatively rare event. In 2003-04, the police shot and killed 3 people over the whole country. In 2004-05, it was 5 people. So these are still rare events. And yet you have that sense of a community-based policing model that is under increasing pressure in the climate we now operate in. So there's political pressure to amalgamate the smaller forces because they just aren't resilient enough to deal with the kind of the ordinary crime threats they now face, let alone the terrorism threat. You have the creation of a thing called the Serious Organised Crime Agency, which people call the British FBI. It's our first kind of national police service. And you have increasingly sophisticated operational and technical responses to both the ordinary criminal threat and the terrorist threat. So you have that tradition under pressure. And then there is something about the Independent Police Complaints Commission and how we fit into that. And let me just say a couple of things about that. First of all, the bit that people probably, if they've heard of us at all, the bit that people know about us is that we have the power to independently investigate the most serious incidents and complaints. Normally those will be incidents where there has been death following police contact, but not only, there may be other issues where, if you like, the outcome is less serious, but nevertheless very big issues are raised. And when they investigate an incident, our investigators have all the powers of a police officer, so they can require entry to police premises. If we were in Boston, they could require entry to a police station, they can seize evidence, they can interview under caution, they could arrest in exceptional circumstances, and they can refer cases to the prosecutor. And about a third of our investigators are former police officers, 2/3 come from other investigative backgrounds. But I think one of the points I want to make that's misunderstood, I mean, we would only investigate ourselves a tiny proportion of complaints, only the most serious incidents. And in some ways, I'm not that far from what Commissioner Kelly was saying. In most cases, I think the most effective response is for the police force concerned to investigate the incident themselves. And quite apart from the resource issues, what seems to me that matters, and one of the problems with an external body, is in the end, it seems to me what works is when Commissioner Kelly or Commissioner O'Toole say, this behaviour, this kind of conduct is not acceptable on my force, is not acceptable for the officers who work for me, or the lieutenant here says that about the people who work for them. And you have to have that message from the boss, and it's not as credible if it's coming from somebody external. And I take the point about and so for most cases, they'll be dealt with by the police service themselves to standards. We have powers to set standards for how the complaint system works, and we can inspect and monitor to make sure those standards are being upheld, and people can appeal to us if they're not satisfied with the way the police have dealt with their complaint. But by and large, it's dealt with by the police themselves. And in the same way, going back to something Commissioner Kelly said, I mean, one of the things that we look for in the way a service deals with complaints, the way its Internal Affairs Bureau is organised, is are they, the departure lounge where the people near retirement, you can't think of anything else to do with, go, or are they, as in the best forces, somewhere that the brightest and best officers have to go, and you can't get to the top until you've done a spell in internal affairs, and the best forces have that kind of approach. But the reality is, right, in the most extreme cases, the British experience was that no matter how well the force dealt with it, if it was the force investigating itself, it wasn't just credible. So if the proper result of that investigation was, look, in actual fact, in these circumstances, the police officers concerned did a brilliant job. If it was the police themselves saying it just didn't work as a message. If there was so it lost credibility because of that. And then because the system had begun to lose credibility in the UK, what had happened is it had got incredibly bureaucratic, incredibly time-consuming. Investigations went on for years and years. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, years and years. And so part of our remit is not merely to deal with the most serious cases, but to try and make the whole thing a bit more transparent and a bit more kind of timely. And that was working okay. And then, as you say, we had the events of July that were a tremendous test for us. And there were and the arguments against our involvement, I mean, there are a number of arguments against our involvement that you could make, I think, that for those kind of extreme situations. I mean, one of the arguments that was put to me, a powerful argument that has force in it, is, look, we're involved in the largest manhunt in the history of the Metropolitan Police Service, and you're just a distraction. We can't have you going in there, trying to ask questions, getting in the way, while we've got something on which hundreds of people's lives are at stake. You're a distraction. You get in the way. That's one argument. And the second argument, which is maybe a particularly British one, is that because our police officers who are armed are volunteers, you're not asking them to do a reasonable thing. How can you expect them, right, to run down the steps of the subway system towards a life-threatening danger when everybody sensible is running very fast in the opposite direction? If they get it wrong, you're going to be on their backs for months at a time. That's not a reasonable ask. There's the point that Commissioner Kelly said is, look, and if something has gone wrong, you won't understand enough about the police culture to be able to deal with it. And finally, an argument I thought about a lot that was put to me was that, look, the problem about the way that you operate is that whether or not you do it differently from the way the police themselves would do it, the officers perceive that you will. And so what about next time? What about next time when the guy on the subway train with 70 other passengers does have a bomb? Right? What about that time, right? And when the police officers are sent down to confront him and they hesitate. Maybe only a second or two, but they hesitate, thinking of the consequences, thinking of the hassle, and those couple of seconds are fatal. Is that the effect you're going to have? And I think those are all, I don't dismiss those arguments lightly. Right? I think that if you have what is rightly described as a very powerful police oversight body, you do have to think about, I was really sure, we had to make sure we were not going to get in the way. Right? We had to, a critical test for the Independent Police Complaints Commission is not only that you have the confidence of the public at large, but that you have the confidence of police officers as well. Right? Because you won't maintain public confidence unless you also have police confidence. And one of the, I think, unusual features about us is that so far we have had that confidence from police officers by and large. Doesn't mean they like us all the time, but there's a kind of grudging respect, I think. And we will now because we can now bring a consistency to the way these investigations are done, will now be part of the training an armed officer has. So one of the things they will get is and if you do pull the trigger, this is what will happen, this is who will come, this is how the post-incident procedures will work, these are the people that will be doing it. And they'll do it consistently, which is an improvement on the previous system. But I don't dismiss those arguments lightly. But on the other side, the positive reasons for an independent system in this situation, I think, are three. Yeah. And the first is about trust. It's certainly the way the system works in Britain, right, is there's a kind of deal. Right? And the deal is this, is that we recognize that in order for you, the police service, to keep us safe, we're going to have to give you special powers, special authority. Right? We accept that. We will sacrifice some of our individual freedoms for collective security. But in giving you those extra powers, the kind of measures that Commissioner Kelly was talking about, it's not a blank check. Right? We want to have, we will be more trusting. Right? We will trust you with more if there is an effective system for making sure that if you abuse that trust, we can hold you to account. Right? And so part of it, if you like, the contract, seems to me, about giving the police the powers they need to combat terrorism, is that there is a system of accountability for how those powers that are used that people can have trust in. The second reason why I think an independent system works is around intelligence, right? And where that's going to come from, and how the next attack is going to be averted. Because it seems to me, I mean, what police investigators tell me, is that however sophisticated the technology and the operations, the crucial information about the next bombers who are planning to attack the London Underground system is likely to come from a member of that community coming forward with information about something they think is suspicious. It'll be that kind. And for them to do that, they have to have confidence in the police service. They have confidence in the system that enables them to do that. They have to have a kind of relationship. And so part of what we do is create that I hope. We don't do it ourselves, but we contribute to that confidence. And then the third issue is this. If you talk about how strategically, right, well, about winning the battle of ideas against terrorism, it seems to me one of the things that we have to do, no matter how difficult it is that what we say, right, is that no matter how mighty you are, the law is above you, right? The way that we work is there are rules. We will play to the rules. We will stick to the system. We won't act in an arbitrary way, right? But we'll play by the rules. Sometimes we need to change those rules in order to be effective. But once they're there, they'll be honoured. There is no kind of blank check, right? And contrast that, right, against the terrorist ideology, right? And all of those things, I think, in a British context, we make a small contribution to. But I don't, as I've said, I don't argue it's a complete answer. And, you know, we are in the middle of a very extraordinary set of circumstances. And so it's, you know, time will tell whether those arguments work. And no doubt they'll be arguing over it for a long time to come. But it's been good to come here and talk about it. Thank you.
Terrific. It's actually, it's fascinating to hear. Both of you were talking about the importance of public confidence. The test of this is clearly both for Commissioner Kelly and for you about public confidence. If you're inside, probably you count on the confidence of the police force. When you're outside, you also have to win the confidence of that police force. And then you're also both talking about culture and the culture of the department, the culture of the force, and how important that is. Commissioner O'Toole, you are probably... We're lucky to have you in Boston for many reasons. One of them is we can invite you here, but if you were actually on the other side of the country, we'd have to have brought you here for this tonight, because you're one of the few police officials who've probably seen in depth both the UK system and the US system because of your time advising on the Patent Commission in Northern Ireland and your service here. When you look at these two models of internal controls and external controls, These issues must have been considered in the Northern Ireland context, where you have obviously terrorism as a long and always present threat, and the need for public confidence in policing was never greater than probably the period you were there. How do these competing ideas balance out, both in those considerations and in your own judgment?
First, Chris, let me say thank you for inviting me to participate today. Genuinely appreciate it. I can't boast a Harvard Kennedy School degree, but I have benefited enormously from the programs I've attended here, and we feel blessed to have the Kennedy School right across the river because so many of your faculty here have contributed to our great successes in Boston, so thank you. Commissioner, we traded you Johnny Damon for Chris Stone, and I think we did. I think we fared well in that exchange. So, thank you for that. I'll speak a little bit about my Northern Ireland experience, and also a bit about my experience in Boston as well. First of all, for those of you not familiar with the Northern Ireland Patent Commission, we were established in the spring of 1998. Senator George Mitchell, and several colleagues did a wonderful job of crafting the peace agreement in Northern Ireland. But at the end of the day, two major issues remained unresolved, and they decided to create commissions to address those issues. One was the issue of decommissioning of paramilitary weapons, and the other was the issue of policing. Policing was one of the most contentious issues, if not the most contentious issue in Northern Ireland, and it was a very divisive issue, with one half of the community, the Protestant Unionist community, having great respect for the police, and the other half of the community, the Irish nationalist community, having little or no trust in the police. When we started our work there, the police department was approximately 95% representative of the Protestant Unionist community. And so the police department actually was very at the center of the political controversy. So Chris Patten was asked by Prime Minister Tony Blair to chair our commission. There were 8 members, including Patten, and it was just an incredible experience because we had the unique opportunity to start from scratch. Our job was to create, and I think the language in the Good Friday Agreement said to create a new beginning for policing in Northern Ireland. And we knew that the politicians gave it their best shot, couldn't come up with the model, so we tried to step aside from the politics and create a model for policing in a democratic society. At the end of the project, we published our findings. Our findings included 175 recommendations for reform in Northern Ireland. Maybe 10% of them were unique to Northern Ireland, and the vast majority would apply to most police agencies in democratic societies. We considered accountability one of our most important topics in our discussions because there were lots of calls for accountability in the police service. Interestingly, not just from the Catholic nationalist community, but across the board. People wanted transparency and accountability in their police service in Northern Ireland. We recommended a very comprehensive model for accountability there, and the community demanded that. I think that while accountability is important in any environment, accountability of the police is important in any environment, it was particularly important at that place and time in Northern Ireland. And hence we created a model that is, I often say, I think it's probably the most accountable police department in the world now. And while I won't get into all of the details, I'll just give you some of the, just give you an overview. We first recommended a policing board, an independent policing board to oversee the police in Northern Ireland, the new police service of Northern Ireland. And that board is supposed to have 19 members, 10 appointed, and the other 9 representative proportionately of the main political parties in Northern Ireland. In addition to political representatives, the board includes subject matter experts and other responsible representatives of the community there. The board essentially sets the direction, sets the policy for the police organization, and I think they've done an extraordinary job in a relatively short period of time of establishing themselves as an independent but responsible group overseeing the police in Northern Ireland. Of course, there are certain political issues that remain outstanding in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin, the leading Irish Republican Party in Northern Ireland, has yet to take up its seats on the policing board, leaving an important void there because until there's widespread involvement by the Irish Republican community, it won't be a board that's truly representative of the community it serves. So, my hope is that Sinn Féin will soon get beyond the political challenges and sign up for the policing board so that the model can move forward even to a greater extent. We also recommended district policing partnership boards that are smaller groups but similarly representative that would work with the regional commanders in Northern Ireland in order to establish really strong lines of communication between the police and the local authorities, the local police authorities, so that there'll be even greater accountability. And then finally, we made a formal recommendation that the Hayes Report, which was the recommendation for an independent police ombudsman in Northern Ireland, be embraced. Senator Maurice Hayes, had worked on the project, came up with a very impressive model for the Office of Ombudsman. He was then appointed to the Patent Commission, so he saved us some time with his preliminary work, but we embraced his model, and that was implemented very shortly after our recommendations were published. So, I think that we did a great job of creating a balanced but effective model for accountability in Northern Ireland. Again, the sooner we get all of the political factions to sign up, the more successful I think that model will be. But I think they've done an enormous amount of work in a short period of time. Nuala O'Lone, who has served as the ombudsman there, has visited Boston several times since her appointment to that position. And, while her tenure has not been without controversy, I think she's done an exceptional job of organizing that office. It was an enormous management task, getting it all up and running, and at the same time, addressing some very controversial but important ongoing cases addressing police misconduct or alleged police misconduct in Northern Ireland. So I think it's been a great success in a relatively short period of time. Room for improvement? Yes, absolutely. But I think those improvements will come because people are moving in the right direction. Here in Boston, I was appointed police commissioner in February of 2004, and I was in the job for approximately, 3-4 months, when my legal counsel came to me and said, "We have a problem." And I said, "What now?" And she said, "Well, we have 2 cases in the pipeline for the Civilian Appeals Board." And I said, "Well, good, send them on." And she said, "That's the problem. We don't have a Civilian Appeals Board." I said, "You're kidding." Because I remembered all of the debate in the aftermath of the St. Clair Commission work in Boston in the early 1990s, when one of their key recommendations was to create some form of citizen involvement, citizen appeal for the Boston Police Department. And a model was created for the BPD in the early 1900s, and a group of individuals were appointed to the Civilian Appeals Board. One of them was a former Boston police superintendent. Another was a former Boston police deputy superintendent. And so you kind of get the picture here, right? Needless to say, not many cases made their way to the Citizen Appeals Board in Boston. So I had one of two choices. First, I could go out and quickly identify people to appoint to this Citizen Appeals Board and get it back up and running. Or second, we could take another look at this and determine, if there's a more appropriate way to address this issue in Boston. And rather than take the path of least resistance, I decided to go with the latter, and we've been working closely with the Institute of Race and Justice at Northeastern University on that project. They were on board at the time under a federal grant to look at integrity and professionalism issues in the Boston Police Department. So we conveniently reassigned them to this project. I asked them to do a benchmarking study to look at best practices not only here in this country but elsewhere throughout the world. I also encouraged them to look at the work we did in Northern Ireland. But we all acknowledged early on that we needed to create a model that was unique and appropriate to our jurisdiction, incorporating best practices but recognizing the unique issues we face here in Boston. So they were well underway with their work when we had a horrible tragedy here in Boston. About a year and a half ago, a young woman, 21-year-old college student in Boston named Victoria Snellgrove, was struck in the eye with a pellet from a less lethal device that was in the hands of a Boston police officer in the aftermath of the Red Sox victory over the New York Yankees. And needless to say, the Boston Police Department, underwent a lot of scrutiny at the time. And in the early days following the tragedy, I recognized the need for external review. And thankfully, we had some great people who stepped up and agreed to serve as an independent commission to study and oversee the investigation of that horrible tragedy. Don Stern, former U.S. Attorney in Boston, chaired the committee. Don's here today, and I'll be forever indebted to him for the great work he and his team did. In fact, Professor Stone also served as a member of that panel. And it was the first time in the history of the Boston Police Department that we turned to an outside group to look at an incident that occurred in our organization. So it was something that was unique in our organization, but I think an extremely valuable experience. In fact, I asked Northeastern to purposely slow down their work so that we could learn from the Stern Commission's experience and draw from that too, and we have. Jack McDevitt and his crew at Northeastern reported some preliminary findings to me earlier this year, and we hope that very soon, working with the lawyers at City Hall, and of course, after briefing the mayor and the labor unions and the community itself, in getting some additional feedback, we hope that very soon we'll have a new model for citizen involvement, citizen appeal, civilian appeal here in Boston.
So let me just pick up on that and just ask both the commissioners for a second, because you're both talking about the importance of public confidence and public trust, and you're both talking about the importance, the strength of some outside work. But if you'd had a Stockwell shooting, if you'd had the kind of event that Nick Hardwick is describing from last summer, could you imagine an outside body, an independent commission, a Stern Commission, a civilian review board, coming in and in the very hours and days after that kind of event, beginning their own inquiry? Is that what it takes to have public confidence and accountability in these kinds of operations?
Well, I mean, it depends on what the organization gets used to. If we had a roughly similar situation, we would do the internal investigation, the Internal Affairs Bureau would do that with immediate involvement with the district attorney. Now, each of our 5 district attorneys has their own, for want of a better term, misconduct investigation entity. They have their own investigators, and they have prosecutors that are focused just on those issues. So they would be talking immediately. The district attorney would respond. We wouldn't talk to the shooter. We'd be gathering evidence, gathering information. But the investigation itself would, by and large, be done internally by our Internal Affairs Bureau, and I think it would be, in current New York City, would be accepted as being a well-done investigation.
I think that in our case, a combination of internal and external worked extremely well and during the Stern work, and we'll probably draw from some of that going forward. I'm really proud to say that the Boston Police Department has done an extraordinary job of handling its own dirty laundry, so to speak. In fact, we have one of the highest, if not the highest, sustained rate for allegations against our police officers, because our anti-corruption unit and our internal affairs unit have the best and brightest people in our organization, and they take their responsibilities very seriously. And I'm happy to say that they not only have credibility internally but externally, because they're fair, but they're dogged in their investigations. And while I don't want to speak for Don Stern and Chris Stone, my sense was that while the Boston Police Department conducted the investigation, Internal Affairs conducted all of the interviews during the Snellgrove case, we turned everything over to the Stern Commission for review, and welcomed their feedback and input throughout the course of the investigation. So we didn't relinquish control of the investigation to a completely external body. We did the investigation, but welcomed review and handed everything over without exception. So I think going forward, that model worked well for us during that particular case, and we'll probably draw heavily from that going forward. And I think that community feedback, after that horrible tragedy, we learned from the tragedy, but people really appreciated the fact that we stood up, we accepted responsibility for the police department's role in the tragedy, we welcomed external scrutiny, we did a good job internally of conducting the investigation, and at the end of the day, as I said, I think some of those practices will serve us well going forward.
Let me ask anyone in the audience, if you have a question, just you can stand up by the microphones, and I'll recognize you in turn. While you're doing that, let me ask Nick Hardwick. You described the tension and the request of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner that you not be involved in that case, and the report now, your investigation of that case, of that shooting, that killing, and that death, is now with the prosecutors. Will the outcome of that case, do you think, have implications for the strength of your organization? Does it matter for the future of independent review in these kinds of cases, whether a prosecution is brought or not in that case?
Well, I don't think, I think the report will have a lot of implications for the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Sometimes it seems to me that we're forgetting who's being reviewed here. It feels like we're the people being reviewed, not the police service. But, one of the things that we say, and I don't want to talk about, if you like, the outcome of that too much, but I do want to say this. One of the things we're really clear about the way that we operate is that we don't start our investigations with the assumption a crime is being committed. We start our investigations with an assumption that there's been a tragedy and people need to know what happened here. So people need to know the facts. And we describe the investigations as, which I hope they are, a search for the truth. They're done to a criminal standard, But that doesn't mean we've made an assumption to start with that somebody is at fault. And one of the things I'm really clear about, I say, look, is that I don't ask our success to be judged by the number of heads we collect. Right? It's as much a result for us to say, look, we've investigated this properly, and these guys were heroes, right? And they should be commended. That's as an important a result as it is for us to say people are at fault and they need to be held to account for that. And the way in which I want to be judged, it's a difficult thing to measure, is have we contributed to building that trust between the community and the police service, and therefore enabling them to do their job better. That's the test, not the number of heads we collect.
Yes, sir. Can you just tell us your name and.
My name is Akshay Vaishnav, and listening to all of you, to me there was a recurring theme about how you evaluate the effectiveness of your work. And we heard a lot of qualitative statements. My internal affairs team is trying hard. I trust them. They're the best and the brightest. Of course, this is reassuring to the public. And equally, an external affairs group, we heard various statements made about how you approach your work. But in some senses, I'm interested in quantitative aspects of your work. That how do you evaluate, for example, in New York, that all these measures that have been put in place are really stopping serious terrorist threats? And equally, from a evaluation of misconduct of police, how do we evaluate that we're getting enough of the right kinds of investigations done, that we're digging deep enough? Can you speak to those kinds of metrics issues? What do you use to evaluate your work?
Well, it's very difficult to value or put a value on what we've done. We've spent a lot of money, no question about it, in trying to protect New York. But whereas a city, as I say, that we've been targeted 8 times, attacked twice successfully. So we put in place something that no other city has put in place. There's no question about that. And it cost us a lot of money to do that. Now, we bring in people, they look at what we've done, people from the federal government, people from other governments, they are impressed with what we've done. We bring in consultants from outside. What do you think of this? What do you think of our deployments? What do you think of our intelligence division? What do you think of our new counterterrorism bureau? Everyone, people whose opinion I value, are very positive about what we've done. But at the end of the day, we'll take each day as it comes. The harder you work, the luckier you get. We've put an awful lot of effort into this, and we're pretty parochial in our view, quite frankly. We don't want them to come into the 5 boroughs of New York. Again, we probably have averaged from $170 to $200 million a year with some opportunity costs and a lot of overtime to carry out our counterterrorism initiatives. We'll just take each day and as it comes. I believe that we have given a comfort level to the public. We've gotten this information out, and people feel good about what we've done in New York. And I think that the manifestation of that is in a city that's been attacked twice successfully, real estate values have never been higher. As I say, tourism was the highest point last year. Now, in 2002, when I became commissioner again, you could drive from police headquarters downtown to Times Square in 10 minutes. There was nobody in the city. Restaurants were empty. There was a kind of a feeling, a general malaise in New York. A lot of predictions that things are going to go to hell in a handbasket. Crime is going to go up. The budget, of course, was significantly hurt because of 9/11. We're 5,000 police officers below where we were in October of 2000. And that's a result of 911. Now we're going to be hiring some additional people, but we're still way below where we were. And that reduction was a result of the impact of September 11th. But if you go to New York now, you can feel the vibrancy in the air. I credit that to a certain extent to the security initiatives that we've put in place. Yes, crime continues to go down, but there is a belief on the part of the people that we're doing everything we reasonably can do to protect New York. No guarantees, but we're doing a lot. Now, as far as digging deep in investigations, was that your second question, sir? How do we know how far is the investigation being... Yes. Well, you have to have confidence in your people, in the people that you select to head in internal affairs. You have to have some oversight of what they do. If a case rises to a level of allegation of crime, the district attorney is involved. As I say, we have 5 of them. So there's a certain amount of oversight ongoing anytime we get an allegation of a crime. Basically, our Internal Affairs Bureau, that's what they're investigating, allegations of crimes. Some serious misconduct, but primarily they're looking at allegations of crime, and that involves the district attorney. But it really is it's confidence in the people that you have in place, their training level. And myself, having been around a long time in this business, I have a good feeling about the quality of the investigations that we do. Not, it was never guaranteed, but I think generally speaking, we're doing an effective and thorough job in a difficult part of the business.
Nick, do you have a sense of how you measure, what kind of metrics you use to know whether your investigations are thorough?
I would say there are two things here. Right? One is, of course, in terms of those qualitative aspects. The way it would work in Britain is that we would come in and validate or not Commissioner Kelly's assertions around the issues of misconduct. And so we would set standards about how we expect corruption and misconduct to be dealt with, and we would go on and monitor and see whether that was actually happening, and then we would report on that. I think, though, I think that if you look at the more quantitative measures, certainly around corruption and misconduct, those are very difficult things to deal with because some of those things you will only find if you look. So one indication of confidence. We know that, for instance, in Britain at the moment, the number of complaints has gone up by about 50%. Yeah? We don't think that's because there's an outbreak of misbehavior by police officers. We think it's because people feel more confident about the system. Right? And before, there were lots of concerns that people had, but they weren't being raised. So complaints going up is probably a good thing, although when we talk to the police staff unions about that they don't sometimes see it quite like that. But on the other hand, there'll be some issues, the more serious matters, say the deaths or injuries following police conduct. I think we would work on the basis that those tended to get reported under any system. And so for them, you're looking for the figures to go down. Right? So you're looking at the deaths following police contact to go down. That's a pretty crude measure. And if you've got both those things happening, I think that's probably telling you you're getting something right. If the lower level complaints are going up, that tells you that people are feeling more confident about the system. If the number of actually the most serious incidents is going down, that means you're stopping some bad things happening, right? And if you can get both those things together, then I think that's not a bad situation.
Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Raul Prabhakar, and I'm a student at Harvard College. And Commissioner Kelly, I'm from Long Island, New York. And I just want to say I'm a proud Yankees fan. And I ride the LIRR in the subways. And I want to personally thank you for all that you and New York's finest do every day. My question is, in the 2004 presidential debate, both President Bush and Senator Kerry named nuclear capability in the hands of a terrorist as their #1 national security concern. And they were certainly thinking about the issue on a global geopolitical level, but you are the last line of defense for New York. And so I wanted to ask, what is being done to address that risk of a dirty bomb, perhaps nuclear or chemical, in the hands of a terrorist in the city? Thank you.
Well, we work closely, of course, with our federal partners. As I said, we have 120 investigators with the Joint Terrorist Task Force. We work with the CIA. So we have a constant information flow every day. We have deployed in the city 700 radiation detectors, for instance. We have them out on patrol 24 hours a day. There are certain areas in the city that we send special patrols with radiation detectors to see if there's any readings. We do get some readings. We have false positives, but it's a regular system that we have in place to check it out. I think it is cause for concern. I don't think we're doing enough to protect our ports. I think it is an area of vulnerability. I was the Customs Commissioner a few years ago, and I'm kind of aware of the systems that they had in place then, certainly, but have in place now. They've improved quite a bit, but still, there's so much that we don't know about what's coming into the country. There is a system that's being piloted now in Hong Kong. I'm talking now particularly about container shipments, and this general concern, it's a fairly widespread one in government about the possibility of a nuclear device coming in somehow in container shipments. The Customs looks at anywhere from maybe 3, optimistically 5% of the containers that are coming in. That's probably a pretty high percentage. But there's a system that's being piloted now in Hong Kong where every container goes through a radiation detector and a gamma X-ray machine. And Stephen Flynn is an expert. He's talked a lot about this. He says that you can put that system in place in major ports throughout the world for about $10 billion, which is not a lot of money if you look at what's being spent. But it is a cause for concern. I think we have to do a lot more as a government, a federal government, to protect our ports.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Josh Potashnik. I'm a junior at Harvard College. I have a question for Commissioners Kelly and O'Toole. Both of you are commissioners of major big cities on the East Coast, and I know whenever discussions in Congress flare up over where Homeland Security dollars ought to be appropriated, there's a conflict between big cities that are kind of logical terrorist targets and states like Wyoming and Montana that get kind of a disproportionate share of these dollars. Do you think that your cities get a fair share of federal funding? And if not, and I'm assuming that might be the answer, what areas specifically do you think you could use more funding for in your cities?
Well, I don't mind taking a shot at that one first. It's been a very challenging time for us in Boston over the last several years because we've lost tens of millions of dollars of state and federal funding. We no longer have the COPS program as we knew it in the 90s. And right now, our department is down between 10 to 15% of our sworn personnel at any given time. And it sounds, although we're a much smaller department in New York, where Commissioner Kelly has tens of thousands of police officers. In Boston, we have slightly more than 2,000 police officers right now. But proportionately, it sounds that we've lost a similar percentage of officers in recent years. That's a huge challenge for us. We have to do more with less. It's also, we learn from these experiences too. I've been in the business long enough to know that some of these fiscal crises are cyclical, and it forces us to figure out how we can do business more effectively and efficiently. But in terms of the Homeland Security money, I think it's a work in progress. I think that Homeland Security had a huge challenge just in terms of its reorganization or its organization, and now we're finally starting to establish much better lines of communication. In fact, in Boston, we have established this Boston Regional Intelligence Center that services our entire UASI region, not only the city of Boston, but 8 communities surrounding Boston. In this new intelligence center that includes federal, state, local law enforcement, and the private sector is housed in Boston Police Headquarters. We're now accessing some DHS funding for new analysts, for GIS professionals. We had a team from Homeland Security come in last week, a very senior team of intelligence representatives from DHS, and they're looking to take best practices from our model to try to create a national model for intelligence gathering and processing and dissemination at the local level. So they're very interested now. I think they're getting beyond their initial organization challenges, and now they're getting out, and they really listened to us. They weren't dictating what we should do on a local level. They said, okay, we need to listen. What do you need? And we focused on 3 things. We have a full-time representative now of the Boston Police Department at the HSOC, the Homeland Security Operations Center in Washington. I know that Commissioner Kelly has representatives there too. It's great to have eyes and ears there representing our interests, and I'm pleased that they're receptive to that. They're talking about now sending some of their representatives to Boston to give us more resources here at the local level, and I believe they've already done that for New York City. And then finally, they're saying, what can we do to help you enhance your Homeland Security operation in Boston? Unlike Commissioner Kelly, where he has a whole separate unit, in Boston, because we have a relatively small city, relatively small police department, we've integrated our Homeland Security strategy into an all crimes, all hazards approach, and it's working well for us. But I'd say that we've finally developed a much stronger dialogue with DHS. They're listening, and I'm optimistic that going forward, we'll get our fair share of resources. We need to be at the table fighting for that fair share of resources, and in Boston, we're trying to do that.
Get the last word, Commissioner.
The problem is not, as I see it, so much with Homeland Security as with Congress. They're just not willing to distribute the money based on threat. We've been arguing that since 9/11. There is some encouraging talk that's coming out of Washington. The administration is talking about distributing the money threat-based, and Congress has kind of grudgingly gone along with that. We'll see. We're going to get some dispersal of monies here at the end of May. We've put in a request for some major projects in New York, and we'll see if, in fact, they actually do what they say they're going to do. The problem essentially is all politics is local. I've gone down Congress. I've made this pitch. I worked in Washington for 4.5 years. They said, yes, we hear you in New York, but we need X in this county, and that's what gets you reelected. I understand that, but are you talking about changes? What I would like to see is authorization to spend money on personnel, hire individuals or overtime. That has not been a favorite thing for the federal government to do. Even when I was down there trying to get additional monies for personnel, they wouldn't do that. They'd give you equipment, and that's kind of what's coming down the pike these days. Lots of equipment, lots of hardware. We really are past that now. We need the money to enable us to sustain our operations, sustain our personnel costs. So we're asking for those changes in the law. I know Mayor Bloomberg has gone to Washington and made that argument. We'll see if they're listening to us.
So the takeaway from some of this, I'm sure everyone has their own, but the two things I take away from this conversation, and in some sense, both of them are a little bit of a surprise for me, I think. One is, all of you, I think, are talking about the connections between ordinary policing, the daily work of the departments, and the work you're doing to protect against terrorist threats or to investigate those kinds of cases. That for all of you, this is part of a coherent, single operation. The policing cities, policing major urban areas today with the terrorist threats is still actually a cohesive, coherent operation, and you've got to get all of it right together. There wasn't a sense from any of you that the terrorism issues are just different in kind and require a different kind of management or a different kind of discipline. We're all going back to the same fundamentals of policing. The second takeaway for me is that the public confidence, whether you're talking about the metrics or you're talking about just what makes why the internal systems work, or why the external systems are important, or why, in fact, the kind of political, even at a moment of tremendous political change, that the bottom line, in some sense, for all of you, was about public confidence in that system. And that may actually be the defining element of policing democracies in ordinary times as well as these times. So thank you all very much indeed.
Good job.